Hi, I'm Ashy. Today I'm going to talk through how I created the acrylic Northern Lights painting. This is actually the third acrylic Northern Lights painting I've done over the years, and I really love how they've turned out. They're super fun and they're bright and colorful, and they kind of give me a fix until I can actually check seeing the Northern Lights off of my bucket list in real life. So these are painted from reference photos. So the first thing that I do for this painting is just do a super light, loose pencil sketch, and that's just to orient myself to the perspective of this painting. So for the reference photo, you can see that the person is kind of close to the ground and then pointing the camera up. So it looks like those trees are kind of like angled in toward the Northern Lights sky. So I just really wanted to kind of get that perspective down on the canvas to where I could see it. All of these pencil lines are going to be covered though when I start my painting because acrylic is opaque. Next I start mixing the colors for kind of an underpainting. Now, you don't have to do an underpainting in acrylic painting, but I find that doing a really light wash of color just to cover that white canvas gives me more of a unified finished look to the painting. So it kind of tones that canvas in the direction that I want the overall color of my painting to go. And it just kind of gets rid of that white page staring at you or white canvas staring at you also. Now, you can see that I'm pre-wetting the canvas here, and then I mix a lot of water into my paint just to make it super loose and wet. Now, if you've heard that you cannot put a lot of water into the acrylic paint because it'll affect the integrity of the paint, that pretty much just isn't true. I actually did a video that looks at how much water you can add to acrylic paint before affecting the integrity or causing any problems with the painting, and I found some information that was really specific and apparently pretty well researched and experimented on. So check out that video. It's linked in the description if you are interested in knowing how much water you can actually add. After doing the underpainting, I begin mixing up the colors for the background of my painting. So for when I'm working with acrylic paints, I generally work from the back of the subject to the front. So the very back of this is the sky, essentially. And I'm starting with those darkest areas and kind of building up layers and layers, and I leave some of the lighter values toward the center of the painting, but I'm really starting with getting those dark edges. I also paint around the edges of my canvas when I'm painting. Not everybody does that. Some people just do a solid color, some people leave them unfinished. I like to just kind of wrap my painting around. As I'm building up this first layer of just dark sky, I'm thinking about leaving some lighter value in the middle. Also, I'm thinking about the direction that those lights are going to be shining and trying to build some of that kind of streakiness, I guess is the best word for it, into this layer as well. Again, just trying to kind of get that perspective going, that things are kind of starting at the center top and that light is really streaking out and away from that point down toward the ground. After I get kind of a good base sky layer, I loosen up some white paint with some water and I splatter in just a bunch of stars toward the edges of the painting, also in the middle some, but kind of more concentrated on those darker areas that aren't going to have the northern lights covering them. Now here my camera cut out, so I wasn't super happy about that. Sorry though. You can see that I kind of added the first layer of green, and I was just trying to get that swirling pattern from the reference photo. Then I go in and I am adding in this super intense yellow. So it's mostly yellow, a little bit of white, a little bit of green. It kind of all blends together as I'm going here, but it's that very intense yellow for the bottom. And I'm looking for, again, just that streakiness of the northern lights. So I kind of go back and forth between pulling my brush up and pulling the brush down to create the effect that I want, and I'm just really playing with it. And this large 2-inch brush I think worked really well. It's just a 2-inch flat wash brush. It's a cheap one that I got, I think at Hobby Lobby, but it's not a high quality brush by any means. But it works really well for this. It helps keep it kind of loose and large, big shapes. So I'm just trying to build up those shapes. And at this point, my husband said that it looks like there should be a UFO at the top of this painting. So maybe I'll do something like that another time. If you think that's a good idea, let me know down in the comments below. From here, I just keep adding in more shades of green and yellows and blues and letting them all kind of blend together and working on creating, again, that glowy, streaky look out away from that most intense center swirl, I guess is the best way to describe it. I'm really just trying to capture how bright and colorful this reference photo really was. So now I'm mixing in some darker values again, just around and between the swirls. This just kind of bumps up the contrast between the sky and those lights, and it helps define the shape of that swirl pattern a little bit better. And I'm just kind of cleaning up the edges. I kind of want a crisp edge in some spots and then a soft blend in other spots. Sorry about my head being in the way in some of these shots, but just trying to see my work better. I stand sometimes when I'm painting, I sit sometimes, you know. Now I'm loosening up some of that white paint again just to go in with more stars because I covered a lot of them up while adding the lights and those darker values. So you can see here that I kind of blocked in the road. I didn't get that on camera, but I just kind of blocked in that road and made it kind of look streaky, hilly on the sides for the snow. And I'm also just blocking in these tree trunks again just to get the perspective. So that perspective, it's like I'm standing on the road and just gazing up toward those lights, and then all of those trees are really pointing toward that center focal point of the northern lights. And I really enjoyed the perspective of this reference photo, and that's why I was so drawn to it and really wanted to paint it. So after I block in those trees, I go back to the background of my painting, and I'm painting in this background forest area. Now this is really just a mass of silhouetted, basically nearly black trees, but I do use a fan brush here just to add a little bit of texture. It's so far in the background that you would never really see all of these details, so it's mostly just a black mass. And for some reason here I painted this corner that's right in the front, and I don't know why I did that. Maybe the edge of that canvas wasn't all the way covered, but yeah, I did that for some reason. And then I go back to the background. Most of this background is going to end up being covered with the mid and foreground trees. So I'm not, again, it's in the background. I'm not worried about details. I'm also not really worried about the shape of a lot of those trees. I just don't want it to just be a random like spot of yellow if there's any space between my trees. And then I go ahead and start the mid and the foreground. And for these trees, I kind of just jumped around. I'm building up the shapes just until each tree is a shape that I like. And I really like to use my fan brush when I'm doing acrylic trees. I think that I get a lot of variety, just some variation, different textures that I can achieve with this brush versus some other brushes. And it just kind of makes the process easier for me. And when I'm painting trees, my main focus is that I'm just holding my brush very loosely, kind of more toward the end than toward the brush part, and I'm varying the direction of my brush strokes very consistently. So each brush stroke is a little bit different. Some are angled more down, some are angled more up, some are pointed more like backwards toward the back of the painting, some are pointed more toward the front of the painting, and to achieve that you do a more vertical downward stroke. Anyway, so if you just kind of stay loose with it, keep the brush rotating different directions, keep tapping, your trees will pretty much look good. As I'm painting these trees, I do keep in mind that there must be space for birds to fly. I heard that somewhere one time. I don't know at all where I heard it. But when you're painting trees, it's not just a solid block of color. There are branches and leaves, but trees have a lot of air. They have a lot of space. So always remember that the birds must be able to fly through your trees. So don't just do a solid block of color. After I finish painting the trees, I go back into the snow and deepen up some shadow areas underneath the trees, deepen up some areas in the road where tire treads are on this snow. I also add a little bit of kind of white mixed with the blue, but white for highlights on the snow. And boom, my camera decided to freeze again. So I think that the camera sometimes overheats and it just quits. Also, to be fair, I had just done 2 watercolor paintings right before this, so the camera was probably tired. But you can see I added those shadows and just added that contrast.